Okay, great. So last week we didn't have a session because I was taken away, and previous week we looked at the what was the second section of the Sefer Yetzirah, and we looked in particular, and we said we're going to look at Hitbodedut and how that connects to the third Mishnah. So if I just kind of restore your memory by bringing up that Sefer Yetzirah section. So we saw how these first three here, the first four, Mishnayot here of the section, correspond to Atik Yomin, which is the Sphira, which is the innermost Sphira, or Partzuf within Keter. Keter has two aspects of it, an inner aspect and an outer aspect. The inner aspect within itself corresponds to the Blima, the essence of silence. So Sphirot Blima is still part of the silence, and is connected to this idea of Ruach, Elohim Chaim, the spirit of the living God. And I think we looked at last time how this comes up in right at the beginning, right before the second Ma'amar of Maaseh Bereshit, where it says Ruach Elohim Marachefet al Pnei Tehom, the spirit of God is hovering above the depths there. And we saw the mistake of Ben Zoma and how he misunderstood that principle, what was going on there. So this is still within the realm of the integrated Sphirot, as they are within themselves inseparable, and that's kind of why they manifest as a silence. Now, speech only manifests when there is a kind of potential difference of voltage between those Sphirot, and there needs to be some form of communication. So the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are the 22 channels connecting those 10 Sphirot together. So when they communicate within each other, it is through the medium of the Sphirot, through the letters, and communication is only required when you don't know already. So we only communicate when I need to tell you something that you didn't already know. So that's kind of like why there is kind of like a polarity, a dynamic interaction between the Sphirot. When they are unequal, when there is an emphasis on one over the other, then there is communication there. But even so, with the principle of the Yehuda Tata, the lower unity, and what we saw last time, as the Sefer here later on in the next section calls one name and one body, Shem Echad Guf Echad. That's referring to the low unity. Here we have a similar principle as well, because here, in the next bit here, we see the first manifestation of the letters of the words, where there is a beginning of creation, the beginning of the manifestation of the Olamot of Briah, Yetzirah, where speech comes into play. We have the separation of the Sphirot into different entities, and then the beginnings of speech. But we still have Ruach Achat Mehen. So we see here, in the second Sphira, Shtaim Ruach Miruach, the breath from breath. We still have at the end of it one singular breath for these 22 letters. And this Sphira refers to this section here, Mishnah refers to Keter, which is a union between or a container for both Yehuda Ilah, Yehuda Tata, because it contains both the principle of unity and the principles of disunity and separation. So breath, there's the idea of Ratzon as well, Ratzu, of what we saw in the Sadigon, where Vayomer is a lashon of Ratzu, of running, of desire, Ratzon. So Ratzu here manifests here, begins with Keter, and it continues with Bina, which is this fire, Arba, Esh Mimayim, fire from water. It's a continuation of Ratzu. But here in the second section, third Mishnah, here, Shalosh Sphira, Shalosh Ma'amei Ruach, which is water from breath, we have, again, that is Keter, that is Chochma, which is an aspect of Yehuda Ilah and the unity. So again, even though I'm meddling up because of it, surely the Blima, the silence, is the idea of Yehuda Ilah. And it is, and it's not, and it's all connected. So all of it is part of the same principle. The whole we looked at it principally. We kind of been turning towards it through the eyes of the Yaakov of Ishbitz of Radzin, There's Bet Yaakov, where he speaks about, he brings the Sefer the Zohar, where he speaks about Hishtadlut D'Oraita and Hishtadlut the Mitzvah, the working of Torah and the working of Mitzvah, where we have Torah as an aspect of Yichud Eilah. It's not actually an aspect of Yichud Eilah, but it's a process moving towards Yichud Eilah, which is this recognition of only God's existence there. Of Yoshev B'Davidon, return, sit alone and be silent. And this idea, that's why last time we introduced the idea of Hitbodedut, as the idea of returning as Badad, as sitting alone. And then we see here that Chakak v'Chatzav, which I mentioned last time again, which I said we're not going to look at this time, maybe we'll towards the end. The Chakak v'Chatzav is underlined because the gematria of Chakak v'Chatzav is Vashov and return. So we're looking here, we're reading these, even though these Sefirot actually are an interchange between returning to silence and the expression. So the between Maaseh Merkavah, which is a seeing the world before its creation, and the Maaseh Bereshit, which is the manifestation of creation, which is the separation, the kind of admittance and acknowledgement and the kind of desire for separate entities, which is creation itself. So these are the interchange. What we're looking at them now is in this particular section is as a continuation. That's why it's the end of chapter 1, which is there's not actually section 2 here. This is still chapter 1. So it's a continuation. That's we're going to look at it as though it's still an aspect of returning to the silence, and that's kind of we're going to pick up from there. So, let's look at now the idea of Hitbodedut and where it comes in and why I'm saying this is Hitbodedut, because what I said previously is that this fourth Mishnah is Hitbodedut, which is clearly from the language you can see that it's talking about Bina. It's about understanding. Hitbodedut means to self-understanding. It's from the same word, but Hitbodedut doesn't necessarily connect with Chochmah. Why is it connected to that? And what the reason why I'm connecting it to that is because Chochmah is this aspect of unity, and in the process of Hitbodedut is about unity. So the Hitbodedut means isolation, self-isolation, which is what I'm going to pick up on. I'll look first of all on the Rambam, then I'm going to look in his son, and we'll go through a series of Svarim on there, of texts from the Svarim. So number 1. Let me now just share with you something from the Rambam. I'm going to bring up the section here. Okay. Okay. So what I've done here is done a little search. I already knew about these texts anyway, but a little search on Safari on the term Hitbodedut and see where it comes up. And the first 2 are the Mishnah Torah and Shulchan Aruch. So when we look at these Mishnah Torah and Shulchan Aruch, first of all, let's have a look at the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam has to say. So this is in his first section of his 14 sections of the Yetzirah Chazakah, which is Ilchot Mada, Sefer Amada, the book of belief, knowledge, understanding. And this is in his Hilchot Yesodei Torah. And he begins saying, he says, this is his important principle, because we've been speaking about Maaseh Merkavah, the principle of it. We looked at Yechezkel's vision, Ezekiel's vision, and prophecy. We spoke about the klipot and how these are aspects of miniot, or things which prevent us from accessing this Ruach HaKodesh, this spiritual experience. And again, even that first mission we saw from the Sefer, the second section talks about Ruach HaKodesh. The first of that spirit, Atik Yomin, is Ruach HaKodesh. This whole process leads us towards Ruach HaKodesh, prophetic experience. Hishtadlut D'Oraita is about Ruach HaKodesh. So what he says here is talking about prophets. Kol Nevi'im, he says, En med Nabi'im b'chol et sheyirtzu, אלא מכוונים דעתם יושבים שמחים וטובי לב ומתבודדים. So he says the prophet, this is in section talking about what is prophecy and how do the prophets come to prophesy. And he says none of the prophets, or all of the prophets, none of the prophets did not, or so all the prophets did not prophesy in any time they wanted to. So they didn't. They couldn't just. They didn't just whenever they wanted to receive prophecy. They had to do some kind of preparatory work for it. And this is what Aruch Kaplan, one of his books here on it, and he kind of mentions it very early on, kind of in the modern renewal of Jewish spirituality, Jewish meditation. That was his kind of premise for writing this book, why he said that prophecy is due to return in Yomot Mashiach, before the Mashiach arrives, and prophecy is not just a thing that happens by itself. You have to study and you have to learn it. And even though we saw, actually, Ken and I, we looked at in the Shari Kedusha, the introduction to the fourth section, how he says that he says that people can prophesy without preparation, but he says it only. But actually, we saw that there was preparation. That preparation was Torah and Mitzvot. So the Torah and Mitzvot, according to Shari Kedusha, Shari Kedusha. I'm getting confused with the other book. Yeah, Shari Tzedek. He says, like we see, therefore, from his understanding that when we practice halacha, when we do mitzvot and maasim tovim, we then can prepare us for receiving of divine inspiration, of Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah. But this is how the Rambam understands it. He says these preparations. So it's not just necessary to do mitzvot. You have to do things outside of mitzvot, which is kind of where this kind of thing comes into play. Are the mitzvot sufficient, or do you need something else for it? And Rambam here seems to imply or go in that direction that you need extra things. Now, my personal opinion is that mitzvot are meditation, and actually, if we expand what a mitzvah is, then actually it comes to incorporate that as well. But again, it's not traditionally what would traditionally be considered the halacha. Someone follows halacha doesn't necessarily mean that's halacha as preparation for Ruach HaKodesh. It doesn't mean you practice halacha and everything to the T. That means you're going to receive Ruach HaKodesh. Unless you come and include Chassidut, Rabbi Tzadok or Kohen, how he says that Emunah is not just a belief in thing that we've seen in Sefer Zechanot right at the beginning. That actually the mitzvot are more than what they appear on the surface. We need to delve deep into them, and we need to and it actually becomes, the whole of Judaism becomes meditation. But anyway, let's have a look at the Rambam here. He says that the prophets do not prophesy whenever they want. Rather, ela mechavnim da'atam, they direct their da'atam, their minds. So he says prepare their minds. But actually, the lashon here is very interesting, because we're going to see this word kavanah later on. Mechavnim da'atam. They have a kavanah, specifically have a kavanah. They direct. Kavanah really means direction, but actually it's a practice we'll see. Mechavnim da'atam. Da'at is what we've seen as well. Confluence between chokhmah and bina. It is knowledge, it is awareness. They direct their awareness, their attention in a particular way. They yoshvim, and they sit. How do they sit? They yoshvim semechim, they sit happy. They sit with a joyfulness. Again, now we'll see how these two principles come, and we'll see them later on, how they develop in the ideas.
Or they rest.
Or they rest, exactly. So yoshvim, again, and this is again yeshev badad bidomi, let me sit alone, be silent. So we see mechavnim da'atam, yoshvim semechim, they sit happy, but tovei lev, with a joyful heart. All Hitbodedut, and ultimately, finally, they mitboded. They enter into Hitbodedut, into silence, into seclusion, into some kind of separation, some kind of seclusion. So it's interesting, because it's already kind of, we got a foreshadowing of what does it really mean they sit in seclusion, right? So he says the commentary here, I guess it's Simon Glazer, 27. He says undisturbed solitude. So yeah, okay. Might be the case. Let's have a look further on. We'll see. Maybe it's referring to something a little bit different, and we'll see how that works as well. Okay, so now let's carry on. She'en nevuah, he says, now he explains it. She'en nevuah shora lo mitoch atzvut. He says that the prophecy does not descend upon a person, does not rest upon a person who is within sadness and despondency, but lo mitoch atzvut, not through laziness. Again, we have to have kind of there's a result there, which we'll say, and I use that word in particular as a result. Ella, why, and what does it come? Ella, rather, it comes mitoch simcha, through happiness, through a joyfulness. Therefore, the sons of the prophets, lifnehem, just like we did earlier on with our shruti books, lifnehem never betov. They have a nevel is a harp or lyre, timbrel. I guess we don't know what the word is really.
Yeah.
He translates it as harp.
They didn't have violins in those days, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean not in violins.
That's a lyre.
Not violin.
Keynote, I think.
So they had nevel, they had a harp and a tof and a drum, a chalil and a flute, a chinor and he says violin, lute probably, right? That's what it means, right? And then they request, mevakshim nevuah. Mevakshim means to request, but also mevakshim means they seek prophecy. Right, just like we earlier on, we used the shruti box, we used the singing bowl, and we did some chanting, and that again, that's this idea of entering mitoch simcha, shrim, mechavnim da'atan, shrim v'simcha, v'smechim v'tovei lev, v'mitzvot, and now we go into isolation. And then he says, he brings a proof of this. V'zeh hu shene'emar v'hemma mitnabeim, and they are prophesying. Kilomar, and what does it mean? They are prophesying. Kilomar. They are treading the path of prophecy until they reach the state of prophecy. Like we say, this person is growing or becoming great. So they are prophesying means they are treading on the paths of prophecy. So here it was interesting. So again, it's interesting here that it doesn't talk about. Then this is referring to Shaul Amelech when he went to see the prophets, and then he received prophecy. It says that he kind of acquired, through their prophesying, he received a prophecy there in a kind of like transmission there. And so I believe that's what it was referring to there. But it says the Hemma Metabim, and they are going through having this prophetic experience. So Rambam here sees that he reads it not as prophecy, but in the pathways of prophecy. But they weren't necessarily learned, but they might have been learned a little bit. So now let's go. Now let's leave that, and we'll question this idea of external solitude. What you might be more familiar with is internal solitude, or maybe you're less familiar with that. But we'll look at that in a minute. Next, let's go to the Shulchan Aruch, who paskins the halacha. Paskins the halacha. What is let's see. So this is in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim and Siman was that Tzadichet. Tzarich sheyeh lo chavana b'tfilato. This is the title, heading of this Siman. A person needs to have kavana, concentration, when he prays. And he carries on. He says, a lot of the way the Shulchan Aruch works is that he takes a lot of his lashon, a lot of it basically on the Rambam. This format is based on the Torah, Arba Turim, but the content itself, much of it is using quotes from the Rambam. Anyway, so let's see what he says. A person who is praying has to have kavanah in his heart. Now, unlike the Rambam, so the Rambam holds that kavanah is me'akev. He says that if somebody doesn't have kavanah, then he has to return to the beginning of the prayer and do it again until he has kavanah. So that is so for him, for the Rambam, it's me'akev. Like it's something which you have to return to. Again, really interesting. Now, later on halacha, we then pass into me'akev. And the Ramah says, I think it's the Ramah, he says that if we were to ask somebody to go back and do tefillah again, he wouldn't have kavanah the second time either. So it's good. It's just basically that, i.e., what he's saying is that it's he'll then be what's it called? What's the expression? I forgot the expression now. Shouldn't have said making a bracha levatala. That's it, bracha levatala. That's what he'll say. Ultimately, it'll become bracha levatala. So he says, but this is how so he does this again. So Shulchan Aruch, I don't think he actually paskins it as a me'akev. He doesn't say it's me'akev, but he says this is what you have to do. Lechatchila, this is how you have to pray. Yichaven b'libo. You should have a concentration in your heart. Perush, and what is specifically what it says? The specific type of concentration or intention one should have is the perush milot. You should have an understanding of the words that you that are coming out of your mouth. You have to understand the words. there's a minimal amount of kavanah. Again, there are layers of kavanah, and he comes to explain it. And then, but that's the first aspect of it. The second aspect, this is how the Rambam understands it also. He has to imagine in his mind, as though he is standing before the Shekhinah, or that the Shekhinah is standing before, is present there before him. And he shall remove all the distracting thoughts from him until his thoughts and his concentration, his intention should be pure, uninterrupted in his prayer. And he should imagine as though he is standing and speaking before a king, a king of flesh and blood. The Hayam, so that if he was, if he had he been standing going before the queen or going before a king, he would be very careful about how he speaks. Hayam mesader devaro mechaven bahem. You should be very careful, very articulate in what you say, and you should place your attention on that you should speak nicely and correctly, so that you should not make a mistake. Right? Kal v'chomer says even more so. Even more so, therefore, you should have concentration before standing before the King of Kings, the Blessed Holy One. Because Hashem Kodesh Baruch Hu, Melech Malchei Melechim, he can see every one of our thoughts. He can investigate every one of our thoughts. Right? And then he says, he gives the example. This is where he brings Hitbodedut.
Is this Rambam?
This is Shulchan. I think he quoted the Rambam in this one. Have you seen the Rambam?
Yeah. I just thought I've been given a wrong attribution because I think I've got that down as.
I believe he's quoting the Rambam. That's why I said. That's why I said right at the beginning that he's quoting the Rambam. So I believe he quotes in the Rambam one. You can put a second attribution. I'm sure Aruch brings it as well. So he's quoting them. So I believe he's quoting the Rambam. But again, what I'm saying, what's important is that Shulchan Aruch brings it. La halacha, really. He says, yeah, definitely. If you look at the, in fact, I can just. Let's look at.
No, I put it down here.
Let's look at the Beragola and we'll see. Actually, it doesn't say that. Beragola doesn't bring it as the Rambam, but I believe you're right. So let me just do the same.
Beragola Mara. Different Beragola.
That's Beragola. Which one? Beragola? Actually, no, that's something else. Different. Yeah. That's just for your Yeshua, so you'll have this for your sake. Might not be an exact quote there, no problem. There's no that exact quote doesn't come with the Rambam. Okay, maybe we'll look. Sorry, have a look into it. I believe you are right, but
that's fine.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So he says here, this is how the original Hasidim and the Anshe Ma'aseh, the men of the people of action, people of great deeds. This is what they used to do. That they should go into isolation, go into solitude. You see, it's interesting. Like, what do you mean going into solitude? Surely they should be with the minion if they're davening. I think that's what the commentaries say. Even though they were in solitude, they still had a minion. So therefore, they weren't really solitude. So what is it? So that's why this question: what is with Hitbodedut? They used to go into isolation. And they should have concentration, kavanah betfilatam, until they reach the level of pashtut hagashmiut, to the removal of the physicality, the complete removal of the physical feeling, and through that you reach a level of the entrainment of the sechel, of the intellect, of the spiritual sense. Until they reach a level which is close to prophecy. ואם תבוא לו מחשבה אחרת מתוך התפילה, he's added something else. And if you did have a extraneous thought come into your prayer, yishtok ad shitbatel machshava, you should remain silent until this thought dissipates. Okay, let me just finish the whole thing. וצריך שיחשוב בדברים המכניעים הלב, and he should therefore go and think about things which subjugate the heart, מכוונים אותו לאביו שבשמם, and things which direct it towards his Father in heaven. ולא יחשוב בדברים שיש בהם קלות ראש. You shouldn't think about things which are distracting. So again, that last bit, I believe, it seems he's adding something. This is the Rama. Next Okay.
Very good.
So again, like I believe Roland is right that he's quoting the Rambam here, but maybe I just didn't highlight the right text there. Again, the fact that the Berigala doesn't bring it is a bit surprising, but maybe not. Maybe it's not surprising.
I think it's Mishnah Torah. I think it's quite.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's Mishnah Torah.
No, I've seen it.
Any case,
it's standard mentor instruction in a way. There's a bit of the Rambam in there. There's a bit of the Nachman in there. Rabbi Nachman speaks about it in very similar ways. Others do, of course, as well.
Yeah, of course.
Stay silent or don't stay silent.
Right.
It's all these. It's good stuff.
Of course, yeah. Of course.
Interesting as well. The terms for distracting thoughts. What was it? What was a machshavot saros? Is that a different expression?
Right at the end, you mean?
Yeah, machshavot.
Machshava acheret, he says here.
Where is it? Yeah. Hang on, I'm trying to find it. Oh yes.
Other thoughts. Any case, that was just. I just wanted to show you that the Mechaber brings it as a halach l'maaseh. In any case, so we now have this principle of Hitbodedut, and that is connected to prophecy, like we saw in the Rambam. And I want to now bring. I think, move into what I've got in front of me here. One second. Yeah, I think I want to bring it towards what I've got in front of me. This is slightly different thing here. Yep. So, right. So we saw Hitbodedut. Right. Now, let's look at... So we brought Hitbodedut from the Rambam as a prerequisite, part of the things that the Nevi'im needed to do in order to reach a level of prophecy. And now let's look at his son Avraham ben HaRambam. I actually do have it in front of me. I can bring it up because. Can I bring it up? One second. I'm gonna show you.
I know exactly what quote you're going to look at.
Can I bring this up?
Yeah, that's the one I sent you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Why not?
I'm just saying. Yeah. Right. Let's have a look. Right, here we go. So I have the hard copy in front of me. This is this was very, very hard to get hold of when I first got hold of it, and I had to. I mean, this is a 1938 translation. Actually, this particular book though was from. It says 1938. I don't know if this is actually a book for a copy from 1938.
He did it in two separate volumes, and they had two separate publishers. And I never understood why, but they had two different. One was Heinemann, and another was.
Do you think this book is from 1938? I thought it was from 1970 something. It's a reprint.
They did a reprint, yeah, but the original.
I believe this is a reprint, but I don't know. This says 1938, so maybe it's 1938, maybe it's a reprint. It was very, very hard to get hold of.
This will be what.
But now there's a Feldheim comment translation of it.
This will be what you quote.
Well, you read it, and then let's have a look.
Yeah, I missed out bits.
Wait, just wait a minute.
In accordance with that, now did the prophets and their followers.
Just wait. So now there's a Feldheim translation of it, but I think it's somewhat edited, censored. I believe so. I haven't looked at it myself, but from what I understand from people who have got the book, I believe it's somewhat censored. But this is the uncensored version. It has Arabic in there as well, the Judeo-Arabic. So you've got it in front of you. Here it is. So let's begin. What quote have you got from the beginning of the chapter?
The most important bit.
Okay, so I'm going to read from the beginning of the chapter. I'm going to read from the beginning of the chapter, and you get to your section. Yeah. So this is a book. It's his magnum opus. Avraham and Rambam took over as the head of the Jewish community from his father, the Rambam, and he wrote a book called, in Hebrew, translated to a Sefer, the Hashem, the book which is sufficient for the servants of God, and it was apparently a massive volume, huge book. But we only have one section of it, and that is this section here, which is 10 chapters, or I think it's 10 chapters, maybe it's 11 chapters, on what the translator here calls a highway to perfection, which is his tenfold path towards prophetic, or at least a spiritual communion with God, similar to Duties of the Heart and Mesilat Yesharim, and books of that note. This is the last of those chapters, and he says here, solitude is the last chapter, and it is therefore the last, the most for him, the principle, the final thing we get to before we reached before we have this experience with God, the communion with God. And so Hitbodedut, which again, it's not a translation of Hitbodedut. The Arabic here is al-khalwat, something, I think that's how you pronounce it. The Sufi term khalwa is the idea of solitude, isolation. I don't know how to read Judeo-Arabic, but again, I know enough to know that's what that's referring to. It's the title of the chapter as well over there. But again, so the translation is become translated as Hitbodedut. All the translation we will see, and on the Rambam as well, when they were translating from the Arabic, when they're writing in Judeo-Arabic, that is Hitbodedut as the word they use in Hebrew. So this is the word Hitbodedut, solitude. So he begins saying, he says, solitude is among the most distinguished of the elevated paths. It is moreover the way of the very great saints, and by it did the prophets achieve union with God.
Also in there.
Right.
There you go.
Now, it may be divided into external solitude and internal solitude, and the aim of external solitude is the attainment of internal solitude, which is the last rung of the rungs of the ladder leading to the union with God. Nay, it constitutes such a union. So it's a very important section, because he really lays it down. He brings it right to the essence of it. He says there are two types of solitude. There is external solitude, being alone, being separated from other people, from society, going on a retreat. But then through that it leads us to an internal solitude, which is meditation. What is internal solitude otherwise? It is being alone with God. And he says here, more than that, it is actual, what he refers to as the union with God. Let us then say, I'm going to carry on, let us then say in reference there too, that internal solitude, and by it is meant the complete sincerity of the heart to attain that which David prayed, saying, create me a clean heart, O God, and which Asaph attained according to his statement, my flesh and my heart faileth, but the rock of my heart and my portion is God, consisting of the clearing of the heart and of the mind, of everything except him, exalted be he, and of their being filled with and inhabited by him.
Now that comes about through the inactivity of the sensitive part of the soul.
Yeah.
Now this comes apart through the inactivity of the sensitive part of the soul, or most of it, and the withdrawal of the impulsive part from the rest of the worldly things, and its inclination towards him, exalted be he. It's interesting, because I sort of moved the quotes around. It's interesting. I put this. He talks about external versus internal, and I sort of plugged them together. So now external solitude may be either complete, consisting of forsaking cities and isolating oneself in deserts and mountains, and wherever there is no settlement. So that's going on a retreat. Or it may be incomplete, such as isolation in houses and the like. And that's what we do quite a bit. Again, it may be frequent and it may be temporary and it may last a long time, or it may be a short duration. As for lasting all life long, that is impossible in this lower realm. Internal solitude, then he goes on, consists of clearing the mind and the heart and mind of everything except him. And that comes about through this internal process.
Right. So what's interesting is that the reason that we've seen already a few principles. We saw Zrizut, which we saw as the lack of laziness in the Rambam. We saw Ruach HaKodesh and Ruach Elokim Chaim in the beginning of the Sefer Yetzirah, and we see here the idea of the cleanliness of the heart. Now, these ideas are a principle in one of the earliest paths to solitude, to Ruach HaKodesh, to union with God, which was made famous by the Ramchal in his book called Mislei Sharim. And the reason why it was made famous is because his book was made famous by Rav Salanta, who was the founder of the Muslim movement, who really appreciated that book. So that was based on a quote from the Gemara, I think it's in Avodah Zarah, relating to someone called Pinchas ben Yair, who was connected to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who was either either his son's. I forget. I keep forgetting what it was. Like the Zohar says, I think he was the father-in-law of the Gemara. According to the Gemara, he was the father-in-law of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and according to the Zohar, he was the father of his son, father-in-law of his son, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. That's if I remember correctly. But anyway, there's a difference. He's connected to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. In any case, he was considered he was a full of a tzachassid, and he had these 10 stages, 10 steps, or asra ma'alot, how the Midrash Melchomot Mashiach refers to it. Towards Ruach HaKodesh, and part of these things are Zrizut, alacrity, and Nikiut, and these 10 steps towards there. Which is going to be, this will be important for us because later on we're going to be looking at these things, in particular when we look at section number 3. In any case, we now see how Hitbodedut is this internal aspect. And if you don't have a copy to these books, I would recommend having a look at Ari Kaplan's Meditation on the Bible, because his second chapter, is precisely about Abraham Maimonides on this Hitbodedut. So this is one of my first books I read on meditation. In fact, it was the first book I read on Jewish meditation, and I didn't even realize until later on that this first chapter, the second chapter, which has such a massive impact on me, was actually from the Avraham ben Rambam. And actually, Roland, you haven't read this book, but it actually quotes at the back, which you might find useful for your new book.
For your next volume. Read that and the Kabbalah one.
So, Hitbodedut. We see here that Hitbodedut is an internal form of meditation. And I now want to kind of look into other aspects of it. So, let's stop sharing that. Was a very early. So one of the people speak. Actually, it was interesting. I didn't bring it. One of the people who spoke about it. In fact, I can speak about it. In fact, I will share it with you. I have it in front of me here. I haven't got a copy of it. There's no copy online I can find for it. This is Sefer Shara Kedusha, which is a book compiled or written by Aruch Vital after the passing away of the Ari. And this book was published a few times. One time, the main publication of it, omitted the last chelik, which is the chelik on how we attain prophecy. So it just introduces it with a kind of like the beginning, the introduction of it. And then it kind of says, I'm not going to continue because it's not appropriate to do so. And that was possibly one of the reasons why it was promoted as a book, as widely read. But in more recent years, and there were manuscripts that were maintained from it, more recent years we have a printed copy of this fourth section. And this fourth section is mostly quotations from other books. And the first section of this quotation is an explanation and the practice brought forth by Avraham Abulafia, who was the founder of the ecstatic Kabbalah and the most famous proponent of the ecstatic Kabbalah. outside of Baal Shem Tov, who I also believe was a proponent and exponent of ecstatic Kabbalah and a practitioner of ecstatic Kabbalah. And so he was, again, I haven't brought a quote from him from his books, and I've got them to do so. But for him, meditation, Hitbodedut, was an internal form of concentration practice. And actually, I might as well, since I've got this book in front of me, I'll quote from this book, because he quotes from Abalafia. And I think this is a quotation from Otzar Eden Ganuz that he's bringing here. And he also quotes from Chayal Amba as well. But this is a second Shara Shlishi from the fourth section. And it says B'Tnai HaSega. So the subtitle is the methods, the Tnaim, contingencies for the attainment of prophecy, Ruach HaKodesh. And this is a section he begins quoting from Otzar Eden Ganuz. And it begins here. This is Abalafia's words, really. Hitboded bevait yechidi. He should sit alone. Hitboded bevait yechidi, alone, alone in a house. And he shall don his talit v'teshev v'ta'atzim inecha. You shall, and now it's in the imperative. You shall close your eyes v'titpashet min hachomer ki'ilu yatz'a nafshecha. And you shall remove yourself from physicality as though your soul has left the body. And it is ascending heavenward. תקרא משנה אחת איזה שתרצה, פעמים רבות תכופות זו לזו. I'm not actually sure this is Ablafia, having said that. It might be. But he said, in any case, so now what you should do is you shall take a Mishnah and you should repeat it again and again and again. So you can use a Mishnah as a way of removing physicality. במהירות, and you should do it very quickly, גדול, ככל שתוכל בשפה ברורה, with a clear לשון, a clear language, בלי דילוג בה או בטבע אחת, without missing out a single word. So you have to really have pay a lot of attention to it. לכוון להדביק נפשך בנפש התנה, הנזכר משנה ההיא, and you shall have intention to connect with the soul of the person who the author of that Mishnah. Actually, this is not the. I just realized I'm looking at the wrong section I wanted to read. This is not Abu Lafa. I believe it might be Mechaber Shulchan. I think it might be Rasaf Kar, because he speaks about this practice, I think, in the Magid Mesharim, isn't it? Do you know better than I do? Anyway, it's somebody else. But this is the section. But anyway, we'll see that already from there. Another section here. Again, that was already enough. You shall sit alone in a house, and you should close your eyes. Again, it's the same lashon. Maybe it's paraphrased by the Rav Chaim Vital. And if you wrap yourself up in talit and tefillin, it's better. Until once you have removed all or distracted all your thoughts, or remove all the distractions from your mind, you should do a permutation of one word in your mind, whatever word you want. It doesn't matter which word you use. There's no requirement of what to do. Whatever you want. Derech Mashah, for example, Eretz, which is the word Eretz, which is three letters, Aleph Resh Tzadeh. Can permute as Eretz, as Etzer, as Ratza, as Yira'atz, as Tsa'ar, as Tzara. These are the 6 permutations. וכן על דרך זה בכל תיבה אשר תעשה, זולתי שיהיה על דרך היושר בצירוף כלומר. And any way you like, as long as you're doing it correctly. Again, so what we see here is a meditation practice, or at least a letter pronunciation practice. So, which this practice will lead you to what in the Shara Tzedek, which is a book by one of the students of Abalafi, most likely. These are 2 volumes here, Sulam Aliyah, Shara Tzedek, very similar actually in content. Sulam Aliyah is much later. Shara Tzedek is thought to be a book by one of the students of Abalafi. In that book, he talks about a Sufi technique, which is what he refers to as mechika, which is mechika means to erase. And they would repeat the names of God. They would do that, which is called dhikr or zikr practice in Arabic. They have 99 names of God, and they repeat them over and over and over again. They repeat these names, and through that they reach this level of mechikat machshava, or what we said afisat machshava previously, where the mind is erased. And he says that is very close to the level that we're attaining to, except that they don't have Kabbalah to explain what's going on there. That's what Shara Tzedek says here. But we see here that there's the same principle here, that we're using Sefer too, which I find, again, Roland also agrees with me on this one, that this is one of the most powerful techniques for reaching this level of absorption and removal of thought, extraneous thoughts. So here we have Hitbodedut connected with this idea of the removal of thoughts, of meditation. We've already seen it with the removal of thoughts, but now here we see it with a meditation technique. Okay, now later on, the next section in Shara Kedusha, he quotes from the Sefer Meir Atanayim, which is a book by Yitzhak the Akko. He possibly also was a student of Abulafia, a direct student of Abulafia. He was an itinerant mystic. He came from Akko. He then traveled to Spain. He went to North Africa, I believe, as well. And he was famous for trying to verify, or for being suspicious about the authenticity of the Zohar. And he went to verify the authenticity of the Zohar, and I think in the end he vouched for its authenticity. But that was one of his kind of things that he was famous for. But he also wrote a book called Sefer Meir Atanayim, and I think he wrote another book as well. And this is what Avraham Vital quotes here. And I'm going to skip the first section for a minute, and I'll move to the section he says here. So he talks about this idea of hishtavut, which is equanimity. Now, in this process, he speaks about, he gives a story here. So the story begins with someone called Ravi Avner, which no one knows really know who that is. Again, this is quoted quite a lot all over the place. One second.
What are you quoting now? Meir Atanayim?
Meir Atanayim, yeah. So he says here, he quotes this Rabbi Avner in Meir Atanayim, כי בא איש חכם לאחד מן המתבודדים וביקש ממנו שיקבלוהו להיותו מן המתבודדים. So somebody, Rabbi Avner quotes, explains, there was a person who went to one of the wise people who were referred to as mitboddim, the meditators, the people who go into solitude, and he requested from this person that they should accept him to be concluded and considered one of the mitboddim, one of the meditators. V'amar lo hamitboded, and the person who went into seclusion, he says to him, Baruch atah bani, blessed art you, my son, to God, L'Hashem ki chavanatcha tova hi, because your intention is good. Omnam, but hodi'eni in hishtavita imlo. But tell me, please, have you reached the level of hishtavut or not? And Amar lo, Rabbi, Teverecha, the guy said to him, what do you mean? What are you referring to? Now, hishtavut is an interesting principle. So, in the previous section, Rabbi Avraham, so Rabbi Yetzirah, he says that Hitbodedut is just like we saw in Avraham and HaRambam. It's the last stage. Actually, it's the penultimate stage, but it's basically the last stage of the process. And in order to reach this level of Hitbodedut, we have to go through some preliminary practices. And here, Rabbi Yetzirah, he lists the preliminary requirements. And he says here, just before this section, he says, "V'hine achash yizkeh ha'adam el tzad hitdabkut kaniskar haniskar." He says that when a person, in order to reach a level of hitbodedut, he must first reach the level of hitdabkut, what is referred to as hitdabkut here, but other places called dvekut. He must reach the level of dvekut. And this level of dvekut is kel esod hishtavut. Through this level of dvekut, he will reach the level of hishtavut. And if you merits to reach the level of hishtavut, he will reach the level of hitbodedut. He'll be able to be one of the meditators who receive the Panei Shekhinah, who receive the face of God, the divine presence on a daily basis, according to the Gemara. Or not. That's a topic for a different day. And then he carries on, and since he has merited this level of Hitbodedut, his Ruach HaKodesh, he will merit the level of Ruach HaKodesh, which we referred to earlier. And from this he will merit Nevuah, prophecy. He says, that is to say, he shall prophesy and he will relate future events. So this is the process that we have that goes from that leads us towards Hitbodedut. So this idea of Hitbodedut needs a bit more clarification. What is it referring to? Now I'm just aware of the time and the fact that I need to go. So what I want to do is I want to leave that there, and then we'll pick up from Me'irat Naim, and we'll look at what these preliminary practices are that lead us towards Hitbodedut and how they relate to meditation practice. Okay. See you next time.